Without my consent, without my knowledge, and without any legal right, they listed my home for sale. I was on a job site when a text from my neighbor, Dolores, arrived with a picture that sent a chill down my spine. Unfamiliar men in professional attire were taking measurements of my grandfather's cabin deck. Meanwhile, a real estate agent in expensive shoes stood on my driveway, gesturing toward the house as if calculating her earnings. As I stared at these predators closing in on my family's haven, the sharp scent of spilled coffee filled my truck and my hands began to tremble. A metallic taste of fury coated my tongue as the arrogant voicemail from HOA President Veronica Ashworth played. Just exploring community improvement options? Garrett, you understand? No, Veronica. I fail to comprehend how you believe you can sell something you don't own. What I do comprehend, however, is how to resist. How would you react if strangers were inspecting your home as if the deed were already in their name? And where are you all viewing this from? I truly hope this level of HOA madness is a widespread issue and not unique to my community. Allow me to rewind and explain how this situation developed. My name is Garrett, and the cabin they are attempting to take has belonged to my family for 43 years. In 1981, my grandfather Fletcher purchased those 2 acres using his disability payment from the Korean War. He returned from the war with shrapnel in his leg and persistent nightmares, but he discovered tranquility beside that small lake. He constructed that cabin entirely with his own calloused hands, sawing every plank, hammering every nail, and putting in plumbing that continues to function more reliably than that in many modern homes. "This is our forever home, Garrett," he would say each summer as I assisted him with staining the deck. For days after, the pleasant aroma of pine sap would linger on our hands. "No one can seize what you've built with your own hard work." Fletcher passed away 3 years ago, bequeathing me the cabin and all the memories absorbed by its hand-hewn walls. It's the place my 16-year-old daughter, Mackenzie, goes to get away when her mother and I are clashing, a frequent occurrence since our divorce. It's my weekend refuge where I can recall the sound of silence after 60-hour workweeks dominated by jackhammers and shouting foremen. This land predates the formation of the HOA by 30 years. Grandpa's deed establishes clear title long before these suburban commandos arrived and decreed that all mailboxes must be identical. Enter Veronica Ashworth, president of the HOA and a professional thorn in everyone's side. She relocated from California 2 years ago, drives a white BMW she details twice a week, and believes our charming little community is in need of an upgrade. In reality, she wants to force out anyone who doesn't own a luxury vehicle. Veronica possesses immaculately manicured nails that she uses to gesture at supposed violations. She also communicates in legalese to intimidate those without a law degree. I have personally witnessed her measuring a neighbor's lawn with an actual ruler. I'm serious, a 12-inch wooden ruler, as if we are all in the 3rd grade. Her initial salvo against me was launched 6 months ago. A citation classifying my grandfather's workshop as a non-conforming rustic structure. It seems that handmade craftsmanship falls short of her aesthetic requirements. She insisted on 15 grand for architectural compliance or a complete rebuild to align with her vision of a suburban utopia. When I suggested what she could do with her fees, using terms my grandfather would have approved of, she escalated the situation to today's real estate spectacle. The agent showing my property is Veronica's old sorority sister from USC. The promotional literature branded my family sanctuary as a prime development opportunity with tear-down potential for modern lake access amenities. These predators were seriously talking about raising my grandfather's workshop to construct a yoga studio. Here is the detail that makes my jaw tighten. Their legal position is non-existent. This is an act of pure intimidation, calculated to coerce me into selling for a low price so Veronica can flip the property to developers for 10 times my potential earnings. This, however, is about more than just money. The cabin is my last tangible link to my grandfather's memory. It is the place where Mackenzie feels secure when life becomes overwhelming. It serves as my weekend retreat from construction sites where everything is hurried and nothing is made to endure. The coarse texture of the hand-hewn porch railings narrates the story of a man who did things correctly from the start. The nightly call of loons across the water is the peace Fletcher went to war to defend. The aroma of coffee from his old percolator still permeates the kitchen on Saturday mornings. Now, Veronica aims to destroy all of that for the sake of property values and neighborhood uniformity. Other residents are observing, anxious that they might be the next target on her list. Old Mrs. Patterson was cited because her rose garden was deemed too colorful. The Hendricks family is now subject to daily fines for having their work truck parked in their own driveway. The entire community is holding its breath, uncertain if ordinary people can continue to reside in the places they have considered home for decades, or if wealth and legal intimidation will inevitably prevail. Well, Veronica has chosen the wrong family to challenge. My grandfather did not endure frozen foxholes in Korea just to have some HOA despot seize his legacy. It is time to show her what Fletcher's grandson was taught about fighting back. Veronica's subsequent action occurred precisely 1 week after the realtor incident. It was a formal-looking letter on what appeared to be counterfeit legal letterhead. So poorly done, a genuine attorney would have laughed out loud. Notice of abandoned property statute violation. It declared in bold type, based on Veronica's inventive reading of property law, my use of the cabin only on weekends was considered abandonment as defined by Municipal Code 847, 3B. She threatened me with daily fines of $500, commencing in 30 days, unless I either took up full-time residence or signed over the deed for the community's benefit. The smell of fresh toner from her high-end printer couldn't hide the reek of utter fabrication. She had copied the letter to County Commissioner Bradley Walsh, her tennis buddy from the country club. The implication was unmistakable. I have connections. You do not, therefore, you should just give up. However, there's something Veronica was unaware of regarding construction workers. We are professional problem solvers. When a foundation shows cracks, we don't get flustered. We excavate further to identify the root cause. I used my lunch break to visit the county clerk's office. A musty basement that smelled of countless bureaucratic coffee spills and crushed aspirations. The clerk, Beverly, was familiar with every property scheme imaginable. She retrieved deed records that dated back to a time when this region was only cornfields and fishing holes. Your grandfather was a clever man, Beverly noted, her experienced fingers tracing the original survey markers. Take a look at this. My heart began to race as she revealed Fletcher's 1981 survey. Our property line extended 50 feet farther north than anyone, including Veronica, knew. Placing that elegant HOA community mailbox cluster she was so proud of directly on my grandfather's land. More importantly, the deed contained a provision I had previously overlooked: grandfathered property rights in perpetuity with all municipal exemptions maintained. In legal terms, this meant the land belongs to the Fletcher family forever, and no HOA established after the purchase date could alter that. I've seen contractors saved by old building permits they thought were lost. The same logic applies here. Always verify documentation in 3 separate places before believing someone's claim that you're in trouble. But the truly explosive information came from my neighbor Dolores later that evening. She appeared at my door with a plate of homemade oatmeal cookies and intelligence that left me stunned. That Ashworth woman offered me $500? Dolores said in a low voice, looking around as if we were orchestrating a robbery. She wanted me to photograph your violations? Your truck, your boat, anything she could leverage to build a case against you. She gave me a handwritten list that made my blood boil. The Morrison family was pressured into selling after enduring months of harassment over their non-compliant fence. The Patterson cottage was being targeted for having an excessive number of garden gnomes. The Hendricks clan was getting daily fines for parking their work truck in their own driveway. She's not just targeting you, Garrett, Dolores stated as we walked my property line, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. Her goal is to drive out anyone who doesn't own a BMW. Then Dolores delivered the real shocker. I've been documenting all her actions, she said. Photos, recordings, copies of her harassing letters to other families. I was a high school principal for 30 years. I can spot a bully from a mile away. This kind, 70-year-old educator had been conducting a solo intelligence operation against Veronica for months. She had compiled evidence of methodical harassment, discriminatory targeting, and what seemed to be a deliberate strategy to compel property sales. But this is the part you'll enjoy, Dolores said with a grin. I conducted some research myself. Your HOA president is not who she claims to be. Veronica Ashworth, the individual terrorizing our neighborhood with legal threats, had her California law license suspended due to mishandling client trust funds. Her flawless suburban existence was financed by maxed-out credit cards and a mortgage that was 3 months in arrears. She wasn't some formidable legal expert. She was a desperate fraud who resorted to intimidation because it was all she had left. That evening, I set up security cameras at every corner of my property, motion-activated, night vision. professional-grade models like the ones we use on construction sites to deter equipment thieves. If Veronica wanted to play a game of surveillance, I was prepared to play with superior gear. I also contacted Tom Martinez, a local lawyer specializing in property rights with a strong aversion to HOA bullies. "Bring me everything," he instructed after I detailed the situation. "These fraudulent legal letters, the survey records, your neighbor's evidence file. This woman has just initiated a conflict with the wrong family." My construction crew pledged their support. Blue-collar solidarity is strong when one of their own is targeted by suburban bullies. Even Mackenzie pitched in, helping me sort through the documents and posing innocent questions like, "Dad, is it against the law to lie in official letters?" A sharp kid, she already grasped that our fight was not just for our cabin but for everyone Veronica had targeted. The pleasant scent of pine needles filled the evening air as I sat on Grandpa's porch, sifting through our evidence. For the first time in months, I felt a sensation I hadn't known since this ordeal began. Confidence. Veronica assumed she was engaged in a game of chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn that construction workers can be quite skilled at chess as well. 2 weeks following my discovery at the courthouse, Veronica made her subsequent move, this time with backup. I was in the process of replacing deteriorated deck boards on the cabin when a white county truck drove up my driveway. Harold Wessler, a code enforcement officer, stepped out with a clipboard in his hand and an expression suggesting he would rather be anywhere else. Following him was Veronica, dressed in her power suit like a suit of armor, wearing that self-satisfied smile that set my teeth on edge. "Mr. Fletcher," Harold started, clearly reciting from pre-written notes. "We've been alerted to unpermitted structures on this property. Specifically, that workshop seems to be in violation of current building codes and may need immediate remediation." The workshop, my grandfather's greatest source of pride, constructed with his own hands in 1983, it was as sturdy as a fortress, built better than many of the new McMansions in the area. "What kind of remediation?" I inquired. Though I was already aware this was another attempt at extortion, Veronica advanced as if she had been anticipating this very moment. $25,000 for permits and code compliance updates, or demolition within 30 days. The structure simply does not conform to current safety standards. The pungent smell of Harold's cigarettes blended with Veronica's costly perfume, forming a sickening aroma in the brisk morning air. I could feel the metallic taste of anger rising in my throat once more. However, a key lesson from 15 years in construction is to maintain composure when someone tries to manipulate you with fabricated emergencies. Rather than losing my temper, I took out my phone and began recording. "Harold," I said in a steady voice, "could you point out precisely which codes this 40-year-old building is violating?" Harold fidgeted, looking over at Veronica. "Well, there's no permit on file with current systems. That's because the county lost records during the 2019 computer system upgrade," I countered. "But I'm willing to bet the original contractor still has his copies." Veronica's smile wavered slightly. She hadn't anticipated that I would have done my research that afternoon. I contacted every contractor who had worked in this region during the early 80s. The third call was a success. Jimmy Kowalski, now 74 and retired, but still as sharp as ever. "The Fletcher cabin." "Of course, I remember that project," Jimmy said with a laugh. "Your granddad was a stickler for perfection. He had me redo the foundation twice because one corner was off by a mere half-inch. That workshop was constructed to endure a hurricane." Jimmy still possessed his project records from 1983, which included the original building permit, inspection reports, and final approval documents. Everything Veronica asserted didn't exist was stored in a dusty file cabinet in Jimmy's basement. Often, the most effective defense against bureaucratic bullies is having better documentation than they do, and old contractors are known for never discarding anything. But the true revelation occurred when Harold called me that evening, his voice low as if he were concerned about being overheard. "Garrett, I have to tell you something, off the record," he said. "Those violations I issued today are questionable, to say the least. Mrs. Ashworth has been putting pressure on me to identify issues with certain properties." Harold was facing re-election the following year. Veronica had been contributing to his campaign and hosting fundraisers, while also making it clear that her support was conditional. "I can't state this officially," Harold went on, "but if you submit a formal complaint of harassment, I will support your claim. This is not how code enforcement is meant to operate." The next morning provided my favorite kind of surprise. Security camera footage of Veronica's late-night gardening activities at 12:47 a.m., captured as clearly as if it were daylight on the infrared video. Veronica snuck onto my property with a bag of decorative flower pots. I observed her meticulously arranging them along what she believed to be the property line. Then, using a tape measure to note their precise locations, her scheme was obvious. Place unauthorized decorations on my property, photograph them the next day as proof of property line encroachment, and then use that as the basis for another harassment campaign. However, my grandfather's survey placed those flower pots a full 15 feet within my property boundaries. Veronica was not just trespassing. She was planting fabricated evidence. The smooth plastic of the camera felt cool to my touch as I downloaded the recording. The sharp taste of early morning coffee couldn't suppress my grin as I watched Veronica literally digging herself into a deeper legal hole. I sent the video to Tom Martinez, who nearly choked on his morning coffee with laughter. She has now committed criminal trespass, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to file false reports. He declared, "This woman is single-handedly building our case for us." Jimmy Kowalski delivered the original permits that afternoon, along with photographs of the workshop's construction and a sworn statement confirming the building's adherence to all 1983 codes. Dolores contributed more intelligence. Veronica had attempted to persuade Roscoe at the hardware store to deny service to problem neighbors, which meant anyone who challenged her authority. "She's becoming desperate," Dolores noted, watching from her kitchen window as Veronica drove slowly past my cabin for the third time that day. Desperate individuals make foolish errors. Harold officially retracted the violation notice that Friday, citing incomplete information and the need for further review. Veronica's power play had failed spectacularly. Instead of coercing me into submission, she had created a documented history of harassment and provided me with criminal evidence of her trespassing. But I could sense her desperation escalating, and desperate people are dangerous. The real conflict was only just starting. 3 days after Harold rescinded the fabricated violation, Veronica escalated to an all-out assault. A process server arrived at my door at 6:30 a.m., holding a clipboard thick with legal papers that made my morning coffee taste like ash. It was Veronica Ashworth versus Garrett Fletcher, a lawsuit alleging that my property was collectively devaluing the entire neighborhood by $2 million. The accusations were stunning in their audacity. Her complaint stated that I was fostering a hostile environment through intimidation tactics and deliberate property neglect intended to undermine community standards. She was requesting a temporary restraining order to bar me from my own land while the court addressed her allegations. Her lawyer was Marcus Webb of Steinberg Webb & Associates, a firm that charges $500 an hour to bully working-class individuals into submission. Their letterhead alone likely cost more than my mortgage payment. But desperation leads to carelessness. And Veronica had just made a colossal mistake. I contacted Tom Martinez right away. "Get everything to my office today," he instructed after I read him the complaint. And I mean everything. Deeds, surveys, camera footage, financial records. This woman just gave us the opening to countersue. While I was collecting documents, my friend Rick from the construction crew conducted his own investigation. Rick's cousin is employed by a private investigation firm, and favors among blue-collar friends are taken seriously. "Your HOA queen is in significant financial distress," Rick reported that afternoon. "A bankruptcy filing indicates she has 180 grand in credit card debt, and her mortgage is in default. She's just 3 months away from losing it all." The situation began to fall into place like a well-constructed building frame. Veronica wasn't merely power-hungry. She was financially desperate. Her entire crusade against long-term residents was not about improving the community, but about her own survival. Rick's cousin had found something even more compelling. A development firm named Lakeshore Properties had been discreetly purchasing distressed properties in the area. 3 foreclosures in the last year had been acquired by shell companies that all led back to Lakeshore. "Here's the most interesting part," Rick added. "Lakeshore's specialty is what they term community optimization. They enter established neighborhoods, form alliances with HOAs to harass longtime residents, and then acquire properties at a discount. When people can no longer afford the legal disputes." I recalled something my grandfather often said about foundation issues. "When you find one crack, there are always more hidden below. You have to dig deeper to uncover them all." That evening, as I was going over documents in my kitchen, Tom called with information that made me almost choke on my sandwich. "Garrett, you won't believe this," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "I've been looking into your HOA's incorporation status, and we found a major problem for them." He had learned that the Willowbrook Homeowners Association had never been correctly incorporated according to state law. The initial filing from 2019 was denied by the Secretary of State due to incomplete paperwork and missing signatures. Veronica had never rectified these issues. Every citation she had issued, every fine she had collected, and every enforcement action she had taken over the last 3 years was legally void. An unincorporated HOA has no more legal power than a book club. She's been collecting fees and imposing penalties with no legal basis. Tom clarified, "This goes beyond overzealous enforcement. It's fraud." The gravity of the situation struck me like a ton of bricks. 47 families had been paying illegal fees that averaged $3,200 each. Veronica had amassed nearly $500,000 over 3 years without any legal authority. Some elderly residents, such as the Kowalski family, had taken out loans against their homes to pay her fabricated fines. The stress had literally made people ill. Mrs. Patterson started having anxiety attacks after months of harassment about her rose garden. But the detail that sealed Veronica's fate was this. Tom discovered records indicating she had used the HOA credit card for personal expenditures. Spa visits, vacation rentals, and car payments were all financed with funds stolen from neighbors who believed they were paying legitimate community dues. "This is no longer just a matter of civil fraud," Tom stated. "We're looking at criminal charges. Wire fraud, racketeering, embezzlement, the full extent of the law." The smooth surface of my grandfather's kitchen table felt solid beneath my hands as the complete picture of Veronica's crimes came into focus. She had not only targeted my family. She had been systematically plundering the entire community for years. That night, I sat on the cabin's porch, hearing the loons call across the dark water, their cries echoing like ghosts of better days. The brisk October air was filled with the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace, blending with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. My grandfather always used to say that bullies rely on good people remaining silent and afraid, but occasionally, a bully targets the wrong individual at the precise moment when all their deceptions are on the verge of collapsing. Veronica believed she was contending with one obstinate construction worker over a piece of lakefront property. In reality, she was confronting an entire community that was about to learn they had been robbed blind by their trusted leader. The true fight was about to commence. The major development occurred on a Tuesday morning with a call from Tom Martinez. His voice was tense with the kind of exhilaration lawyers experience when they discover conclusive evidence. "Garrett, you'll want to be sitting for this," he said. "My paralegal has just completed a thorough analysis of your HOA's financial records, and our findings are going to completely change the game." I was in the middle of installing new gutters on a client's house, but I descended the ladder and found a secluded spot behind my truck. The metallic flavor of anticipation was in my mouth as I waited for Tom's news. "Your HOA took in $430,000 from residents over a 3-year period," he started. "But here's the crucial part. Only $180,000 is left in the account. $250,000 has vanished." The figures felt like a sledgehammer to the chest. This wasn't just minor skimming or sloppy accounting. It was methodical theft on a grand scale. "Where did it go?" I inquired, though I had a strong suspicion of the answer. Veronica's personal accounts reveal questionable deposits that correspond with HOA withdrawal dates. "Exactly," Tom went on. "Wire transfers, cashier's checks, and even direct deposits camouflaged as consulting fees. She's been plundering the community funds as if they were her own personal savings." But the financial fraud was only the beginning. Tom's inquiry had revealed the true conspiracy underlying Veronica's campaign of harassment. "Remember that development firm your friend Rick mentioned? Lakeshore Properties paid Veronica $50,000 last month, designated as a community liaison fee," Tom said. "We have bank statements showing the payment was made just 2 days after she intensified enforcement actions against you and 3 other lakefront property owners." The elements of Veronica's scheme came together with sickening clarity. Lakeshore's specialty was what they termed community optimization, which involved collaborating with corrupt HOA boards to methodically harass long-term residents until they sold their properties at a low price. Veronica would single out families who couldn't sustain prolonged legal disputes. Then, Lakeshore would make lowball offers on these distressed properties. They've executed this same strategy in 3 other counties. Tom clarified, it's the same method each time. A corrupt HOA. Official fabricates violations, families are crushed by legal expenses, and properties are sold for a fraction of their worth. Then, Lakeshore flips them for substantial profits. My grandfather's cabin was merely one component of a much larger scheme. Lakeshore was targeting 3 particular lakefront properties for a luxury resort project. The estimated profit was $15 million. Once they gained control of a sufficient amount of continuous shoreline, Veronica's promised share was $500,000, enough to settle her debts and vanish before anyone discovered what had transpired. But this is where her greed got the better of her, Tom said, and I could hear him shuffling papers in the background. She has been submitting falsified incorporation documents to the court system, asserting legal authority she never possessed. Every legal filing she has made only adds to the fraud charges. The extent of Veronica's criminal activities was astounding. 47 families had been systematically robbed over 3 years. Elderly residents like Fletcher's neighbor, Ed Kowalski, had taken out loans against their home equity to pay fabricated fines. The stress had literally put 2 residents in the hospital with heart conditions. Some families had already given in to the pressure. The Morrison cottage, sold last year for half of its market value, was purchased by a Lakeshore shell company. The sellers were never aware that they were being manipulated into financial hardship by their own HOA president. This is no longer just about your cabin, Garrett, Tom said quietly. This is about safeguarding an entire community from organized crime masquerading as civic leadership. The sharp October wind blew through the construction site as Tom outlined the subsequent steps. Criminal referrals to the district attorney, federal charges for wire fraud and racketeering, and asset freezing orders to reclaim the stolen funds. But most critically, we were going to make everything public. Every resident had the right to know they had been exploited by the person they had entrusted to protect their community. Veronica thought she was orchestrating a clever real estate fraud. In reality, she was constructing the case that would lead to her federal imprisonment, and the entire community was about to learn precisely what their HOA president had been doing with their money. Tom Martinez's law office transformed into our strategic headquarters. The conference table was buried under piles of financial statements, property deeds, and evidence files that resembled those of a federal investigation, which, it turned out, was precisely what this was becoming. We must coordinate on 3 separate fronts, Tom declared, laying out a timeline on the polished wooden tabletop: criminal charges, civil recovery, and community protection. If we execute this properly, we can dismantle Veronica's operation and retrieve every last stolen dollar. The initial call was made to District Attorney Sarah Butler, a prosecutor who had established her reputation by taking on white-collar crime cases. Tom had collaborated with her previously on HOA fraud matters. It seemed that corrupt community boards were becoming a widespread problem throughout the state. For $130,000 in theft, organized harassment, and conspiracy with developers, Tom outlined during their phone conference. In addition to federal wire fraud charges for using mail and electronic transfers, this is exactly the type of case we need to set an example with. DA Butler consented to expedite the criminal inquiry. Within 48 hours, forensic accountants would be scrutinizing every HOA transaction from the past 5 years. In the meantime, I began to organize the community's response. My first destination was the VFW Hall, where my grandfather's old Army comrades still met every Thursday evening. These men had experienced actual combat and were not easily swayed by suburban legal intimidation. Fletcher's grandson requires assistance with a neighborhood issue, announced Roy Patterson, my grandfather's foxhole companion from Korea. The room fell silent as I detailed Veronica's scheme. By the time I finished my account, 23 veterans had offered to help with security patrols and documentation. It turns out that retired military personnel are exceptionally skilled at intelligence gathering and surveillance, abilities that are perfectly suited to combating HOA corruption. Dolores became our de facto community coordinator. Her years as a school principal had equipped her with the skills to manage large groups and maintain meticulous records. More importantly, she had the complete trust of every neighbor. I have been documenting Veronica's harassment for months, she stated, opening a file cabinet that looked like it belonged in an FBI evidence room. It contained photos, recordings, copies of threatening letters, and financial demands, all systematically organized by date and victim. The extent of Veronica's methodical abuse was shocking. 47 families had been targeted over 3 years, with an average illegal extraction of $3,200 per household. However, some elderly residents had paid over $10,000 in fabricated fines and fees. Rick's cousin, the private investigator, supplied the technical support we required: professional-grade surveillance gear, financial tracking software, and, crucially, connections within law enforcement who specialized in organized fraud cases. "Your HOA president made one critical error," explained PI Tony Martinez, who was not related to our attorney. "She became careless with her digital security. Every fraudulent transaction leaves an electronic footprint, and those footprints are indelible." The evidence was compelling, but we needed a plan for the greatest impact. Haphazard accusations would be ineffective. We required a synchronized disclosure that would safeguard the community and thwart any retaliation. Our strategy centered on 3 core components: legal action, media coverage, and community mobilization. Tom would file emergency motions to freeze all HOA assets, preventing Veronica from accessing any remaining funds. The objective was to secure whatever money had not yet been stolen and then reclaim the rest through criminal asset forfeiture. I recalled reading about a contractor who had successfully challenged City Hall corruption by documenting everything and mobilizing public support. The crucial element was to build an unstoppable wave of evidence and community backing that would render any cover-up impossible. For our media approach, we got in touch with Janet Walsh at the local newspaper. No connection to the county commissioner, and certainly not a member of Veronica's country club circle. Janet's expertise was in investigative journalism, and she had received awards for exposing municipal corruption. "This is precisely the kind of story our readers need to be aware of," Janet remarked after looking over our evidence files. "HOA fraud is occurring everywhere, but most people are unsure how to combat it. Your case could assist families across the state." We arranged for a coordinated media rollout. A newspaper feature, a TV news segment, and a social media campaign, all to be launched at the same time. The aim was to generate so much public focus that Veronica would be unable to intimidate witnesses or tamper with evidence. However, the most vital component was community healing. 47 families had been exploited, made to feel isolated and powerless. We needed to unite everyone and demonstrate that they were not alone. Mackenzie proposed the ideal solution: a community veterans memorial garden on the contested property line. Instead of arguing over boundaries, we would create something that paid tribute to all local veterans while cementing the space's permanent community ownership. Grandpa Fletcher would approve of this, she said, creating sketches that featured native plants and memorial markers. He always maintained that the best way to defeat bullies is to construct something superior to what they are attempting to destroy. The Memorial Garden project provided us with a valid reason for community gatherings, volunteer efforts, and media coverage. More importantly, it changed the narrative from one of disgruntled neighbors battling their HOA to a community honoring veterans while confronting corruption. By Friday afternoon, our alliance consisted of 23 veterans, 47 victimized families, 3 local attorneys, 2 private investigators, the district attorney's office, and a highly motivated 16-year-old with skills in architectural drafting. Veronica believed she was up against a single, stubborn construction worker. She was about to confront an entire community, equipped with evidence, legal counsel, and a just cause. The countdown to justice had officially started. Veronica's desperation escalated dramatically when she saw her meticulously planned fraud scheme collapsing more rapidly than a poorly constructed roof in a storm. The initial indication of her panic arrived on Monday morning. An emergency notice stating that the HOA was being voluntarily dissolved due to administrative restructuring. In other words, she was attempting to seize the remaining funds and vanish before criminal charges were filed. However, Tom Martinez had foreseen this maneuver. By midday, we had secured an emergency court order that froze all HOA bank accounts and prohibited any transfer of assets. Veronica's escape strategy was thwarted before it even began. At that point, she switched from financial fraud to outright slander. On Tuesday evening, I returned from a job site to find my neighbor Carl in my driveway, his expression as somber as a mortician's. "Garrett, you have to see this," he said, handing me a photocopied leaflet that caused my blood pressure to soar. These had been placed on every car windshield in the grocery store parking lot. The flyer displayed a blurry image of my cabin with the headline "Dangerous Neighbor Alert" in large letters. According to Veronica's anonymous propaganda, I was a mentally unstable individual with a history of violent threats, who constituted an immediate risk to the community's safety. The falsehoods were astounding in their inventiveness. I supposedly had a criminal record for assault, complete fabrication, stored suspicious chemicals in my workshop with stain and motor oil, and had issued terroristic threats against HOA board members, demanding they adhere to actual laws. But Veronica's smear campaign failed spectacularly when she attempted to bribe key witnesses to corroborate her narrative. Dolores appeared at my door on Wednesday morning with information that made me grin like a wolf that has spotted its wounded prey. She offered me $3,000? Dolores whispered, looking around as if we were discussing classified information. She wanted me to sign a statement affirming that you had been harassing elderly residents and making threatening phone calls. The bribery attempt was recorded on Dolores's phone. Apparently, 30 years of managing high school students teaches you to document everything. Veronica's voice was perfectly clear, offering money for false testimony. But here's the truly foolish part, Dolores went on. She made the same offer to 5 other neighbors. We all compared notes. She's offering a total of $15,000. She doesn't have to create fake witnesses for crimes that never occurred. Meanwhile, our security cameras were capturing Veronica's increasingly erratic behavior. She drove by my cabin 17 times on Thursday alone, sometimes pausing to take pictures, other times just sitting in her BMW and staring at the property as if she were plotting something. At 2:47 a.m. on Friday morning, she finally lost control. I was awakened by the sharp noise of breaking glass and the pungent smell of spray paint. My security system was sounding like an agitated swarm of bees, with motion detectors illuminating the entire property. The infrared cameras recorded the entire event in sharp detail. Veronica, dressed in dark attire, spray painting foreclosed in massive red letters across my grandfather's workshop. She had also broken 2 windows and scattered what appeared to be drug paraphernalia near the property entrance. Her plan was both obvious and desperate. To create the appearance of drug activity, make an anonymous call to incite a police raid, and then assert that her dangerous neighbor claims were valid all along. But Veronica had made a critical error. She failed to disable my security system beforehand. Every moment of her act of vandalism was captured from 3 different perspectives, including clear facial recognition images when she looked straight at the cameras. I immediately called 911, followed by Tom Martinez, and then Sheriff Deputy Mike Harrison, who had been keeping an eye on the situation since we filed our criminal complaint. This woman has just escalated from fraud to breaking and entering, Deputy Harrison commented, examining the security footage in my kitchen while Veronica was handcuffed in his patrol car. In addition to vandalism, planting evidence, and filing false police reports, she is now facing serious felony charges. The planted drug paraphernalia was a particularly foolish move. The empty baggies and a crack pipe were still covered in Veronica's fingerprints, even without the security cameras catching her in the act. The physical evidence would have led directly back to her. By Friday morning, the news of Veronica's arrest was circulating through the community more rapidly than gossip at a church gathering. The local newspaper featured a front-page story with the headline, HOA President Arrested for Harassment Campaign. Janet Walsh's investigation had revealed even more damning details. Veronica had tried similar schemes in 2 other states before relocating here. She had been sued for HOA fraud in Arizona and had her law license suspended in California for misusing trust accounts. The person who had terrorized our community with legal threats was, in fact, a serial fraudster specializing in small-town scams. Yet, even with multiple felony charges against her, Veronica was not done. Desperate individuals with nothing to lose can become dangerously unpredictable, and she still had supporters willing to help her retaliate. The final confrontation was about to commence, and this time, there would be no holding back. Veronica's arrest should have been the end of the ordeal, but desperate criminals with influential connections do not surrender easily. Within 12 hours of her arrest, she had secured bail through a bondsman associated with Lakeshore Properties and retained Blackstone Crisis Management, a reputation laundering firm that charges $50,000 to make scandals vanish. Their response was immediate and harsh. Monday morning brought automated robocalls to every home in 3 zip codes, with a synthesized voice asserting that I was the actual criminal in a plot to seize community assets through false allegations. The calls implored residents to demand the truth about Garrett Fletcher's violent history and drug-related activities. At the same time, fraudulent social media profiles began to propagate lies as quickly as a wildfire in August. Professionally designed graphics displayed altered images of my cabin with captions about meth lab operations and terrorist planning meetings. My construction business's Yelp page was inundated with one-star reviews alleging that I had stolen tools, threatened clients, and performed substandard work that put families at risk. But Veronica's crisis management team made a critical mistake. They targeted my daughter. On Tuesday afternoon, Mackenzie arrived home from school in tears, holding a letter from the principal that requested a meeting to discuss concerning reports regarding home environment and parental supervision. Someone had contacted the school district, claiming I was psychologically unstable and kept dangerous chemicals and weapons in the presence of a minor. They also alleged that Mackenzie was often absent from school and exhibited signs of neglect. All complete falsehoods intended to provoke a Child Protective Services investigation. The metallic taste of sheer fury filled my mouth as I read the letter. Attacking me was one thing, but involving my 16-year-old daughter was a line that should never have been crossed. That was the moment our community coalition moved into full-on battle mode. Within hours, Roy Patterson's veteran network had pinpointed the crisis management firm's local operatives. It turned out that Blackstone was conducting their campaign from a rented office above the pizza parlor on Main Street, paying college students $20 an hour to make robocalls and post fake reviews. These corporate mercenaries believe they can intimidate a community that includes men who have fought in 3 different wars, Roy declared, his weathered hands as steady as a sniper's while he arranged surveillance shifts. They are about to discover what genuine resistance feels like. Meanwhile, Dolores had rallied every teacher, parent, and school board member in the district. Principal Morrison received 47 phone calls in a single day, all from esteemed community members attesting to my character and Mackenzie's welfare. That girl is one of our top students, Morrison informed me during our meeting. She's on the honor roll, a volunteer tutor, and has never been absent without a valid reason. Whoever filed those reports was either misinformed or intentionally lying. The CPS investigation was completed in just 2 hours. Social worker Amanda Rodriguez assessed our clean, well-kept cabin, looked over Mackenzie's school records, and spoke with 3 neighbors who had known our family for years. Mr. Fletcher, this seems to be a malicious report intended to harass your family, Rodriguez stated. We are closing the case effective immediately and marking the complaint as potentially fraudulent. But the decisive moment came when Tom Martinez's forensic accountant uncovered Veronica's offshore banking operation, concealed within a Caribbean shell company named Community Solutions LLC. The account held $380,000, nearly all the funds stolen from HOA residents over 3 years. Wire transfer records indicated that the money had been moved in small amounts to circumvent federal reporting rules, a typical money laundering strategy. She has been orchestrating this escape for months, Tom explained as we examined the banking documents in his office. Small transfers, shell corporations, offshore accounts. This was not opportunistic fraud. It was a sophisticated criminal operation. Even more significantly, the IRS had been tracking suspicious banking activity linked to Community Solutions LLC. Veronica was no longer just facing state fraud charges. She was now confronted with federal tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering charges, all of which carry mandatory minimum prison terms. By Thursday, her crisis management firm had discreetly ended their contract. Blackstone's expertise was in managing scandals, not in defending serial criminals facing decades in federal prison. Veronica made a final, desperate move on Friday evening, a last-ditch effort to salvage something from her crumbling scheme. She called Tom Martinez directly, proposing to return half of the stolen money in exchange for lesser charges and a sealed plea deal that would keep her crimes from becoming public record. She wants to negotiate. Tom informed me over the phone. 50% restitution, a minimum security prison sentence, and a gag order to prevent any public discussion of her fraud. The offer was an insult, asking the victims to accept a 50-cent on the dollar settlement while safeguarding the criminal's reputation. But it also showed just how desperate Veronica had become. What was your response? I asked. I told her she will face every single charge, repay every last dollar, and do so in front of the entire community she victimized. Tom answered, "Some crimes are too grave for secret agreements." The sound of loons calling across the lake drifted through my cabin windows as Friday night descended upon our beleaguered community. The following day was the town hall meeting where everything would be laid bare. After months of harassment, deceit, and intimidation, justice was finally arriving in Willowbrook, and Veronica Ashworth was about to learn what happens when small-town communities unite to fight back. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes one feel fortunate to reside in small-town America. By 9:00 a.m., vehicles were already forming lines outside the Willowbrook Community Center, and by 10:30, the parking lot resembled that of a county fair. The community center hadn't drawn such a large crowd since the high school state championship win in '98. Every seat was taken, with people standing along the walls. Local media had positioned their cameras at the back, while state TV crews had set up near the front to get the best shots. District Attorney Sarah Butler was seated at the main table with Sheriff Deputy Mike Harrison and FBI Agent Rebecca Torres, whose presence caused a stir throughout the audience. When federal agents attend small-town gatherings, it's a clear sign that serious matters are about to be addressed. Veronica showed up 20 minutes late with her only remaining lawyer, Marcus Webb, who looked as though he would prefer to be defending tax evaders rather than small-town swindlers. She had exchanged her usual power suit for a more subdued navy blue, but her hands trembled as she held a legal folder filled with desperate, last-minute motions. Tom Martinez rose to speak to the crowded room, his voice projecting clearly above the buzz of anxious neighbors. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today because your HOA president has been methodically defrauding this community for over 3 years," he stated, as a large screen lowered behind him. "What you are about to witness will be shocking, but it will also clarify why your HOA fees continued to increase while community services diminished." The initial slide displayed Veronica's banking statements. $430,000 collected from residents, with a mere $180,000 left in the official accounts. Gasps rippled through the room as the full extent of the theft was revealed. Mrs. Patterson, seated in the front row with her oxygen tank, audibly whispered, "Oh my Lord," for all to hear. "So, where did the missing funds go?" Tom went on, advancing to the next slide. It detailed Veronica Ashworth's personal bank accounts, credit card expenses, spa visits, vacation rentals, and a $50,000 payment from Lakeshore Properties for services that had no connection to community improvement. The audience's murmur grew into angry muttering as residents understood they had been financing Veronica's lifestyle while contending with their own financial hardships. But the truly explosive moment arrived when Tom presented the security footage from my property. "This is your HOA president at 2:47 a.m. last Friday, spray painting foreclosed on a resident's property and planting drug paraphernalia to incriminate an innocent family," Tom declared as the high-definition video played on the large screen. The room was in an uproar. Cries of "criminal" and "lock her up" filled the air, while Veronica remained motionless, watching her late-night crime spree being shown to the very community she had terrorized. At that point, the elderly Ed Kowalski, leaning on his walker for support, slowly rose to speak. "This woman compelled me to take out a mortgage on my home to pay her fraudulent fines," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "For 32 years, I have lived in this community without any issues. Then she arrived and informed me that my American flag was non-conforming and my garden shed required $20,000 in permits." One after another, victims stood up to recount their experiences. The Morrison family, forced to sell their cottage after months of harassment. Young parents who had to borrow from their retirement funds to pay fabricated violations. Elderly residents who were hospitalized with stress-induced heart conditions. 47 families, over $400,000 stolen, and 3 years of systematic abuse presented as civic responsibility. Veronica finally tried to speak, her voice almost inaudible over the crowd's anger. "These are just misunderstandings," she started, but District Attorney Butler immediately interrupted her. "Mrs. Ashworth, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly advise you to exercise it." DA Butler then stood to address the community directly. "Based on the evidence collected over the past 2 weeks, We are bringing 23 felony charges against Veronica Ashworth, including grand theft, money laundering, racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. The official announcement was met with a thunderous applause that continued for nearly 5 minutes. FBI agent Torres then added the federal component. Mrs. Ashworth utilized wire transfers and mail fraud to move stolen funds across state lines. She is facing additional federal charges that come with mandatory minimum sentences of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. But the moment that brought everything into focus, the definitive mic drop, that would be remembered by all, occurred when Roy Patterson, my grandfather's old Army comrade, stood up holding a folded American flag. Fletcher's grandson did not just fight for his family's property, Roy proclaimed, his voice resonating with the authority of someone who had served his community for 6 decades. He fought for every family in this room. That is what true Americans do. We defend each other against those who abuse their power. He presented me with the flag that had been flown over the state capitol in tribute to all local veterans. Your grandfather would be proud, son. You did not just protect his land. You upheld his values. The standing ovation went on for 10 minutes. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up for years finally felt secure. Families that had been isolated by harassment realized they were not alone. Veronica Ashworth sat in silence, witnessing her empire of deceit crumble before 300 witnesses and 4 news cameras. Justice had at last arrived in Willowbrook, delivered with small-town flair and observed by everyone who mattered. 6 months later, the sound of a judge's gavel resounded in the federal courthouse as Veronica Ashworth was sentenced to 5 years in prison and mandated to pay $2.8 million in restitution, which included punitive damages to ensure every victim was more than fully compensated. Mrs. Ashworth, you betrayed the sacred trust that communities bestow upon their elected officials, Judge Morrison stated. Your methodical fraud is the most egregious form of power abuse. All the stolen money was reclaimed through criminal asset forfeiture, including funds concealed in Caribbean accounts that Veronica believed were untraceable. Every resident received a complete refund with an additional 18% interest, which changed lives almost instantly. Ed Kowalski was able to pay off his emergency mortgage, and the Patterson family enjoyed their first vacation in 5 years. But the true change was more profound than mere finances. Our Veterans Day Memorial Garden dedication attracted over 500 people, including Governor Patricia Williams, who spoke about ordinary citizens demonstrating extraordinary bravery. The pleasant aroma of apple cider and fresh donuts filled the crisp November air as 3 generations of veterans stood in formation and saluted. The garden itself surpassed every vision Mackenzie had drawn in her notebooks. Native wildflowers encircled granite markers honoring all local veterans, while the main monument featured Fletcher's words, "This is our forever home. Nobody can take what you build with your own sweat." Standing there, observing my daughter place flowers at Grandpa's memorial stone, and feeling the smooth, warm texture of the polished granite under the autumn sun, I felt something I had nearly forgotten during the months of legal strife. Pure tranquility. The community's impact extended well beyond our own neighborhood. Our case set the standard for combating HOA fraud across the state, with Attorney General Martinez creating a task force that looked into over 200 suspicious associations and recovered millions in stolen funds. 3 other similar schemes were uncovered in different counties, likely saving thousands of families from financial ruin. The Willowbrook model is now studied in law schools as a prime example of successful grassroots legal action. Mackenzie's college applications were practically effortless. Her essay on fighting corruption through community action resulted in 12 acceptance letters and a total of $84,000 in merit scholarships. She opted for the pre-law program at State University, explaining her choice simply, "I want to help people fight back like Dad did, but with better documentation from the start. My relationship with my ex-wife improved in unexpected ways. I always wondered if you would ever fight for something larger than yourself," she confessed. "Seeing you protect 47 families settled that question." The new Willowbrook Neighborhood Association is dedicated to genuine community betterment, focusing on playground enhancements, scholarship funds, and an annual festival that attracts visitors from 3 counties. Property values rose by 15%, following the positive media attention that emphasized our community's strength and integrity. Tom Martinez created a statewide property rights education initiative, using our case as its cornerstone. We have personally advised on dozens of similar conflicts, assisting communities in identifying the warning signs of fraud and forming effective resistance groups. Documentary filmmaker Sarah Butler received a regional Emmy for Small-Town Justice, which presented our story as evidence that grassroots democracy remains effective when communities unite. The final piece of justice arrived last month. Lakeshore Properties was indicted on federal racketeering charges for systematic community fraud in 4 states. Our small-scale conflict had contributed to the exposure of a nationwide criminal operation. Personal healing has been a slow but steady process. The hand-hewn porch railings Fletcher constructed still feel solid under my hands each morning as I drink my coffee and watch the golden light spread across the serene lake. The call of loons over the calm water now brings only a sense of peace, the rhythm of a community that has learned to defend itself. This morning, a letter arrived from a family in Tennessee experiencing similar harassment. After a long phone call where I shared everything we had learned, they felt empowered to fight back. Assisting others brings purpose to all that we went through. Each victory against corruption reinforces democracy. Every community that unites makes bullies weaker. Fletcher's grandson did more than just protect his grandfather's property. He helped safeguard families across the country from predatory exploitation. The blend of morning coffee and satisfaction is a taste that never grows old. Neither does the knowledge that ordinary individuals can achieve extraordinary results when they choose not to be silent. Now it's your turn to contribute. Share your own HOA horror story in the comments section below. What would you have handled differently? Have you looked into your association's incorporation status recently? Your story could empower another family to take a stand. Click that subscribe button for End for HOA. We are creating a community of individuals who will not allow corrupt boards to take their homes and aspirations. Because at times, the most meaningful way to honor the past is to fight for the future. Remember, corruption only succeeds when good people remain silent. Your voice is more powerful than you realize. You've been watching End for HOA, where entitled Karens receive a dose of reality. If this episode sparked secondhand anger or a sense of satisfaction, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to be the first to see more weekly HOA mayhem.